Hello, hello, hello. Okay, so that title might be a little bit, it might be dramatic, it might not be. I don't think it's dramatic, and let me know in the comments if you think it's dramatic. But yeah, the indie game industry is just different now. Things are a little bit different. It's the end of the indie game industry as we know it. But actually, in a weird, strange way, and we'll talk about this towards the end of the video, in a strange, weird way, we're almost going back to the basics, back to the early 2000s of how games were sold. I don't know, we'll talk all about it, but the premise of this video is that the indie game industry is it's just changing right under our noses. Like, everything's changes. I mean, I don't know if you saw the layoffs. You've got Humble Bundle laying off people. Armor Games Studios, that's one of my publishers for my game Pinstripe. That was one of my first publishers. They had a major layoff, right? My current publisher, 3D Realms, went through some layoffs and shifts as well. And in fact, publishers and studios across the world, it was like a seismic shift in 2023 and 2024. This is the post-COVID era, and COVID is certainly responsible for a lot of this, including just an influx of cash into the economy. But also people just staying home and people working remote. And then you have AI art coming in, AI everything, and that changes just what's required for game studios to function. Suddenly you don't need certain people because, well, frankly, you have AI that can do a lot of the back-end stuff, right? So a lot changed in 2023 and 2024. And on top of all of that, we've got like 80-some thousand games being released on Steam in 2023. It's certainly exponential, the amount of games being released. So all that to say, it's kind of scary right now. But I'm here to tell you that I'm actually very, very excited and very, very encouraged about this new era of indie game development. Now, this is just me sort of spitballing and riffing. I'm not sure if I'm right here. No idea. But I'm going to give you a handful of ways. Wait, I'm looking at maybe 4 or 5 ways here. I'm looking at my notepad, by the way. 4 or 5 ways here on how you can survive this strange seismic shift. Some would call it the indie apocalypse. Just so you know, I do have some credibility here. A lot of indie game YouTubers, they give a lot of advice, and they're not really making money off games. I make money off my games, Neversong and Pinstripe. And I'm even currently making money off my game Twisted Tower, which is published by 3D Realms. So, and by money, I mean they're funding this entire massive project. Point being, I've been in this industry for almost a decade, making money off of my indie games. None of my indie games have been viral, yet it still pays my bills, and it does more than pay my bills. Me and my family actually can build wealth from our games, and that's really, really cool, right? And now I have a studio and a team, and people's salaries are paid. All that said, I'm just trying to give you some credibility here about what I'm about to say of how you can survive the indie game apocalypse, because I really do want you to succeed, and I don't want you guys to freak out. So anyway, there's this thing that Chris Zukowski, this is the first way to avoid the indie apocalypse. There's this thing called the sandbox, and Chris Zukowski came up with this term. And the sandbox is basically like, I don't know, something like 80% of games are in the sandbox. They're games that don't have a lot of reviews. Like, they don't have, let's say, like 10 Steam reviews. And that's the majority of indie games being released on Steam. So point being, most of these indie games that we're competing with on Steam, they don't even have 10 reviews. And no offense to anybody who doesn't have 10 reviews, but that just sort of puts you in the majority of games, right? And so you're not going to stand out. So first rule here is to get out of the sandbox, okay? And the way to get out of the sandbox with your game is to get Steam reviews. If you can get 10 plus Steam reviews, something happens with the Steam algorithm where you just get hit into a different sort of stratosphere and there's a different layer of the algorithm, and then you start to get more noticed on Steam. And, by the way, if you want to go deeper into all of this stuff on how to actually make 6 figures, not only with your game, but with just a demo. There's a link below on how to secure six figures with just a demo. I know that sounds gimmicky, I believe me, but this is what I do for all of my games. I did it with these games, and then I also did it with Twisted Tower as well. I secured six figures in funding with just a demo before I even finished my game. Didn't have to freak out about selling copies of my game. I already was making money off of my games and funding the game before I even finished it. So click below to check that out. So that's the first thing, is just get 10 reviews. And you might be wondering, well, how do I get 10 reviews? And that brings me to my next point, which is get wish lists, right? So you need to be building your wish lists before you launch your game. So start a YouTube channel, start posting content on Twitter, do something, post on Reddit, do something to start getting wish lists. You should aim for at least 10,000 wish lists, and you can do it, by the way. You can get 10,000 wish lists, and I did that without a YouTube channel. And so you can do it too. You've just got to be focused and diligent and be thinking, how do I get it out of the Steam sandbox and actually get 10 plus reviews? You do that with wish lists. And then here's something that I found really, really interesting. This was from a buddy of mine. His name is Jason Smith. Jason Smith said to me, he said, well, I asked him what was wrong with the indie game industry and how can indie game developers survive sort of this cancer that's sort of eating through the indie game industry right now. And he said, in a word, what's going on is oversaturation. So it's super duper crowded in the indie game market, and it's been oversaturated for a long time. But in my opinion, it's getting worse now that you've got incredibly talented folks from the AA and AAA scene who are tired of the state of the industry and are splintering off to make their own small studios. So now you've got industry professionals with more resources also competing with the devs who just quit their full-time jobs to chase a dream while living off of savings. On top of that, you got 50 new games coming out every day to compete with, shovelware or not. If you don't have wish lists, this is the key. If you don't have wish lists, you're going to get buried by 15 corn games and 8 asset flip with AI-generated key art and never spend a second on new and trending. Finding success among all of that feels like playing the lottery, and it shouldn't be that way. So what do we get out of that from Jason? And he made a game, again, called Cultic, and it was overwhelmingly positive, and it's done really, really well. I even asked Edmund McMillan, the creator of Super Meat Boy and Binding of Isaac, about the state of the industry. And he said, I feel like the response is universal at this point. Too many indie games are released daily. It's still very flooded. And he continued to mention that he feels like there's really only 2 solutions. The only solution we have is to make better games. Design always wins. You can make a very simple design that shines very bright gameplay-wise. I continue to ask him sort of my solution, which is, what do you think about making smaller scope games with super tight and unique mechanics? And Ed responded simply with, it's what I'd like to be doing in the future if I'm able. And more importantly, it's to make something truly unique for an audience. Okay, so this right here is actually my biggest piece of advice to you to survive the apocalypse, okay? Or it seems like an apocalypse. Be the indie game developer who has an audience that's built in, okay? And I've heard people say this to me, Thomas, you got lucky. Thomas, you're lucky you have an audience. Why would anyone assume that this is luck? Posting videos weekly, twice a week, live streaming all the time. Frankly, I work my butt off to keep this channel going, right? I'm building an audience, and I have intention behind what I'm doing, right? I'm building an audience. And I highly, highly, highly recommend you build an audience. There is no greater asset in 2024. Write this down. There is no greater asset in 2024 than owning an audience. Because if you own an audience, getting those 10 Steam reviews, I can do that in an hour. I can snap my fingers, and in an hour, I'll get 10 reviews, okay? And that's through an email list or a YouTube video or whatever. And that's not me bragging. That's me saying that hard work that I put in for the last, 6 years of running this YouTube channel and creating content for this channel pays off every day because I can snap my fingers and certain things can happen. And I want you to have that ability too. I don't want you just to make a game. I want you to have a game that you can instantly shout through a megaphone. And that megaphone is owning an audience. Okay? The second thing here, the second thing I want you to focus on to survive this indie game apocalypse is I want you to think about profit, not gross revenue. Okay? A lot of indie game developers, they think, I want to make $1 million game. What does that even mean? Right? I want to make $1 million bucks for my game. What does that even mean? And I've thought that way, and I have even thought that way recently. And it's kind of like saying I want 1 million subscribers on YouTube. It's like, for what? For why? Like, what's the point here? Instead, I want you to be thinking about profit. I want you thinking about how much money can you personally bring in from a game, okay? And if you set a reasonable goal, let's say even $50,000, maybe $100,000 of revenue on Steam, suddenly what you need to create to get there is much more feasible, and it's not going to cost you $500,000 to create, and your life savings and 3 years of your life. Instead, I want you to be thinking, okay, how do I get to $50,000? How many units do I need to sell to get to $50,000? How many wish lists do I need to get to $50,000? Or maybe just $5,000 on launch, which then would indicate that maybe you can get to $50,000 in a year. So you need to be thinking about profit. How do I get a certain amount of profit? Ultimately, I think indie game studios that focus on smaller, tighter games that have a truly unique mechanic, that are maybe 2 hours long, that are not as expensive, maybe not $25, maybe not $20, maybe $15, maybe $10, maybe even $5. Those tight, small games that you can release multiple times a year, I think those studios will thrive. Now, there's a caveat. The only way they thrive is if they have a tiny budget. I think we're in a season of game development where indie game developers need to almost be like, I don't know, protect themselves in their own little homestead of I use the term homestead. It's like a nestled, cozy, self-sustaining environment where it's just you and a few other developers, or maybe it's just you making games like David Whaley, right? You're in this tiny little homestead and you're self-sufficient, you're barely spending money, and you're making small, tight, hyper unique, I call them diamonds because they're small but they're very, very profitable. Those kind of games. If you can focus on doing that, I think we can survive this indie apocalypse. So to review here, there are two ways that we survive this seismic shift in the indie game industry. Number one, get out of the sandbox. That is, just perform better than most indies at the launch of your game. And that is, get 10 plus reviews, have 10,000 wish lists for your game, something like that. Build up your audience while you're making your game, and make something truly unique. And that brings me to the second point, right? To review here, you want to make a hyper-focused, tight game that's truly unique, and you want to focus on profit, not gross revenue. Don't be thinking about how to make the biggest game ever that makes millions of bucks. Be thinking, how do I make a small, tight, focused game that brings in $50,000 to $100,000? And how can I do that multiple times a year? Now, it's totally fine if you just want to do that one time a year and make 50 grand. If you can survive on that, that's great, right? And frankly, I could, okay? But even better, why not try and make multiple games a year that bring in 50 to 100, maybe $200,000 in revenue, in net revenue or profit, right? Not gross. So anyway, those are the two things that I would really, really focus on. I hope you found this helpful. And by the way, if you want to learn how to make 6 figures with just a demo, click the link below. It's how to get revenue for your game before you even finish your game, before you finish the full game and all you have is a demo, you can actually make money. And I've done that with all of my games, and I want to show you how to do it too. Anyways, really, I just want to say good luck. I love you. I know it's tough in the industry right now, but